She was just a hotel housekeeper until a perfect Spanish phone call during her lunch break changed everything. He heard it. A billionaire, who happened to be passing by, paused and silently watched. The next day, she was called into the executive office. No explanation, no warning. From scrubbing hallway floors, she suddenly found herself sitting across from the mysterious owner of the entire luxury hotel chain. Her life began to take a turn in ways she never could have imagined. But what did that powerful man truly want from her? And why her? Someone who had always been overlooked by the system. This wasn't just a story about luck. It was a tale of hidden secrets, second chances, and a connection no one could have foreseen. Are you ready to find out what happens next? 5 a.m. The cold sound of the alarm clock screeched through the rundown third-floor apartment in the Bronx. Jasmine Brooks, a 26-year-old black woman, propped herself up off the worn-out mattress, her eyes still heavy with fatigue. Streetlight filtered through the thin curtains, casting shadows on the cracked walls like scars of a past she was never allowed to forget. The room was silent, save for the creaking of the old radiator and the wind howling through the cracks in the window. She quietly stepped into the bathroom, where the faucet offered only two choices, cold or colder. The rusty faucet screeched as Jasmine tilted her head under the freezing stream. Her lips silently whispered a prayer in Spanish, one her grandmother had taught her. Un día más, un paso más, no me rindo. One more day, one more step, I won't give up. Still, in her tired, dark-circled eyes, there was something not entirely hopeless. Maybe determination, or perhaps a spark of hope that life hadn't entirely smothered. At exactly 6 a.m., Jasmine slipped into her silver-gray housekeeping uniform. The name tag on her chest was slightly scratched. Housekeeping, Jasmine. The tag didn't say who she used to be. It only told who she was today. The streets of Manhattan were bustling with traffic at dawn. But inside the number 11 bus that Jasmine caught from the corner of Burnside, no one knew she was once the top student in the linguistics department at NYU. No one knew she'd been invited to teach French and Spanish as a teaching assistant. They just saw a black girl with simple braids, wearing cheap headphones, clutching a plastic lunchbox, and her eyes always downcast. She arrived at the Belgrave Manhattan Hotel at 6:45 a.m., a place where marble walls, French crystal chandeliers, and hand-woven Persian rugs were not meant for people like her. The 52-story luxury building in the heart of Upper East Side was a stop for CEOs, politicians, movie stars, and foreign billionaires. But Jasmine wasn't here for a vacation. She entered through the back door for employees. No one greeted her, no one looked at her. The service hallways were always colder. A few tired colleagues nodded at her, and she nodded back before heading straight for the service elevator. Her shift today, floors 35 to 40, executive rooms. The hotel demanded every glass surface to be spotless, every bed made at precise right angles, and towels folded in 3 layers with the logo facing out. Jasmine worked quickly, efficiently without complaints. That's why they kept her, not for her skills, but because she was quiet and efficient. Amidst the luxurious rooms, she was like a shadow. When guests opened the door, she immediately lowered her head, never making conversation, never making eye contact, exactly what the hotel considered a good employee, invisible. But no one knew that every night, after a 10-hour shift, Jasmine took the Q Line train back to the public library near Brooklyn Heights. There, she used the free computers to practice specialized Spanish, reading cultural texts, legal dialogues, and simulation videos for interpreters. No one knew that, even though she was scrubbing the toilet in the presidential suite today, her mind was still with language, and her dream was far from dead. It was just waiting for an opportunity. And she had no idea that that day was the fateful day. A moment that would change everything. A call that would awaken the world that had turned its back on her. And she had no idea that that day would be the fateful one. But fate, before opening the door, often makes us live in the darkness for a long time. Jasmine Brooks once stood before the lectern at New York University, applauded for her comparative linguistics essay between native Spanish and Andalusian Spanish. She was invited to be a teaching assistant, personally recommended by Professor Mateo Sanchez for a graduate scholarship in international translation. They once called her the gem of the linguistics program. But no one told her that the gem would be forgotten when reality collided with the world. When her mother, Darlene Brooks, was diagnosed with terminal pancreatic cancer, Jasmine immediately postponed her internship at the United Nations. She sold her laptop and turned down a Fulbright scholarship. During hospital night shifts, she took care of her mother while trying to study on the phone. But every dose of chemotherapy was like tearing another page from her dreams without mercy. Less than 8 months later, Jasmine sat alone in a lawyer's office, holding her mother's woolen scarf, the only thing left with her scent, and read the debt papers. 3 credit cards, a student loan, 2 unpaid hospital bills. Total, over $68,000. With no other options, Jasmine packed away her scholarship applications. And then, on a cold October day, she walked down Lexington Street in her worn-out coat with frayed shoulders, knocking on doors at every hotel, asking for a job, any job. And that's how she entered the underground world of the luxury service industry. Those who create beauty, but are never allowed to exist within it. The Belgrave Manhattan Hotel was a place where power could walk freely, but people like Jasmine were only allowed to lower their heads. Every workday was a silent performance. Above, the clinking of crystal glasses, the short laughter of people in Armani suits. Below, the swish of mops and the quiet restraint of words choked back. Jasmine had never made a mistake, but that didn't stop Donna Pruitt, the supervisor on the 38th floor, from constantly finding reasons to reprimand her. Donna, a middle-aged white woman with a face always flushed like old wine, loved to control every pillow, every towel folded 5 degrees off. I saw a small water stain on the mirror in room 3812. Very disappointing, Jasmine. Did you finish cleaning? Then why do I still smell the cleaner? Do it again. If I were running this hotel, I would have fired you last month. But luckily for you, I'm not Mr. Walker. Jasmine simply lowered her head. Every time she was scolded, she thought of her mother. If she were still alive, she would tell her not to cry. She would say, "This is temporary. You were not born to be buried in mop cloths." But some days she believed it, and other days she wasn't so sure anymore. There was one thing Jasmine had never given up: language. After every shift, even with aching feet, she still went to the Brooklyn Heights Library. The number 7 computer in the back row was hers. No one contested it because no one else had the patience to sit there late into the night like she did. There, she practiced Spanish listening through political podcasts, learned medical vocabulary, translated mock legal texts. She designed her own lesson plans, trying not to let her mind retreat to where society had placed her body. Each lesson was a small thread pulling her out of the mire, but that thread was so thin that even a gust from Donna could snap it. Until that day, a day like any other, but something had changed. That afternoon, Jasmine brought her plastic lunchbox to the break room on the B1 floor. She sat alone in the far corner, where the security camera's view was the weakest, eating her red bean rice while reading the news in Spanish on her phone. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. A message appeared. "Felicitaciones, Jasmine. Aprobaste el examen con nivel profesional." Congratulations, Jasmine. You passed the exam at a professional level. It was Professor Mateo Sanchez. Her heart stopped for a beat. She quickly dialed him back, and when the other end picked up, she almost screamed in Spanish, "De verdad! Lo logré! Really? Did I make it?" Mateo's warm laugh echoed through the phone. "Not only did you pass, you excelled." She laughed, her eyes welling up with tears. The years of sacrifice, the late-night studies, the late trains, all of it was confirmed. She had proven herself. But she had no idea that, in that moment, someone else was listening. Someone who never walked into the staff room. Someone all the employees were trained not to look directly at. Someone who would change her life in ways she couldn't possibly predict. She had no idea that in the moment she laughed in Spanish, a figure stood in the doorway of the break room, silently watching, his sharp eyes never leaving her, not for a second. By day, Jasmine Brooks scrubbed the floors on the VIP floors, where the doors had golden handles and room plaques engraved in embossed letters. The atmosphere was always quiet, spotless, and taut like a drawn bowstring. Just a speck of dust was enough to warrant a reprimand. But Jasmine never complained. She moved quietly like a shadow, hearing the sound of leather shoes glide over the floor without ever looking up. She had learned how to exist among people who didn't want to see her, not because they hated her, but because she was invisible enough to not be hated. And by night she returned to her world, the world of vocabulary, sentence structure, and complex syntax in Spanish for law, medicine, and communications. Every night at the Brooklyn Heights Library, she quietly opened the DELE exam preparation website, put on her cheap headphones, and hit play. Each click was a step in holding on to a dream that had almost been buried. No one knew. Not a soul. Except for one person. The person all employees only dared to refer to by his nickname, Mr. Glassroom, because his office, located on the top floor, had 3 entire walls made of reinforced glass, overlooking the entire hotel like a cold, silent guardian angel. His real name was Grayson Walker, a billionaire founder and CEO of Walker Holdings, a conglomerate that owned nearly 40 luxury hotels worldwide. It was said that he had once been a child who survived the refugee camps in South Dakota, rising from nothing to become one of the most powerful figures in the hotel industry. But because of that, he never tolerated sloppiness. Among the inner circle, he was known for being difficult, cold, and unforgiving of mistakes. Many employees had never seen his face. Those who had crossed paths with him had one thing in common. Either they were promoted rapidly, or disappeared from the system with nothing but an email saying, "Contract terminated." Donna Pruitt, the supervisor of Jasmine's floor, was one of the few who had directly met Grayson in an emergency meeting. Since that day, she treated maintaining her floor as perfect as a showroom, as a matter of life or death. And that meant Jasmine often became her scapegoat. "Do you think just cleaning the floor is enough?" Donna snapped during one room inspection. "I see fingerprints on the mirror. You think VIP guests are blind?" Jasmine didn't respond. She had tried before, gently explaining that it was due to condensation, that she had cleaned according to protocol. But Donna had scolded her in front of the entire team, forcing her to clean 3 rooms in the middle of the day when guests were about to return. From then on, Jasmine never responded again. That day, the fateful day, Jasmine had just finished speaking with Professor Mateo when the door behind her gently opened. She heard the slow footsteps. When she turned around, she barely had time to stand up and almost dropped her phone. Before her stood Grayson Walker, in a light gray shirt with sleeves rolled up, no tie, but his gaze was sharp and unmistakable. She had never seen him this close before. The photos on Forbes magazine couldn't capture his true presence, calm, dignified and observing. "I didn't mean to interrupt," he said in a deep, cello-like voice. "You were speaking Spanish, weren't you?" Jasmine swallowed hard. Yes, sir. Sorry. I was calling my former professor. I'm on my break." Grayson didn't frown. He didn't interrupt. He simply took a step into the room, looking her up and down, but not with disdain. More like he was calculating, evaluating, identifying. "What's your name?" he asked. "Jasmine Brooks." He nodded slightly, a nod that held no discernible meaning. "Thank you. Enjoy your lunch." And then he left, as if he had never been there. Seconds later, Jasmine still stood frozen in the room. Her heart pounded so quickly that it felt like her chest was closing in. She stared at the door that had just closed, her ears still echoing with the question, "What's your name?" No reprimand, no praise, no expression. But it was that silence that terrified her the most. And that moment, when Jasmine laughed, half crying, half choking back tears in Spanish, was the moment that set fate in motion. One Tuesday afternoon. The harsh sunlight streamed through the small window at the top, casting shadows across the worn-out tile floor of the basement break room. No laughter, no cheerful greetings. Only the smell of leftover lunch, floor cleaner, and the whirring of an air conditioner struggling with dust. Jasmine sat in the farthest corner, next to the microwave with peeling paint, her plastic lunchbox resting on her lap. She ate while checking her emails on her cracked phone. And when the message from Dr. Mateo Sanchez appeared, everything around her suddenly went silent. "Felicitaciones, Jazmín. Aprobaste el examen con nivel profesional. Congratulations, you passed the exam at a professional level." Her vision blurred. Her fingers trembled as she dialed. And when the other end picked up, Spanish spilled out like a river breaking through a dam. "De verdad? No puedo creerlo. Dios mío. Really? I can't believe it. Oh my God." She laughed, then she cried, then she laughed again. The joy exploded like a child being called up for the first time at an award ceremony. She didn't care that she was sitting in a break room. She didn't notice the fleeting glances of the others. Because in that moment, all those years of endurance, those sleepless nights, the times she had bitten back her pride, finally had a response. But it was at that moment. The door to the room creaked open. Jasmine heard the hinge squeak, but she was too absorbed in the call to turn around. She didn't know that Grayson Walker was standing in the doorway, hand resting on the doorframe, his gaze heavy. Unlike usual, when everyone would stand at attention whenever he appeared, this time he didn't speak immediately. He listened, observed, and waited. Jasmine's Spanish didn't sound like something memorized. It had rhythm, it had a native accent, it had emotion. It wasn't technical fluency, but a soulful integration. Something none of the employees he had ever met at Belgrave could do. Finally, he spoke, low, brief, and decisive. "I didn't mean to interrupt." Jasmine jumped and quickly turned around, nearly dropping her phone. "You were speaking Spanish?" She stood up, her hand shaking as she ended the call. Yes, sir. I was calling my professor. On my break. It's fine." He interrupted her, his voice calm like still water. "Where did you study?" She lowered her head. "I studied linguistics at NYU. Spanish was my minor." A brief silence. Jasmine didn't dare to look up. She waited for a reprimand or worse, a termination notice. But he didn't say anything more, only, "What's your name?" "Jasmine Brooks." He repeated the name, as if committing it to memory. "Thank you. Enjoy your lunch." And with that, he turned and left, the door closing softly behind him. When Jasmine sat back down in her chair, her legs were still trembling. Sweat soaked her spine, even though the air conditioning was on full blast. No one spoke. 2 colleagues from her shift stared at her, but no one asked anything. Because everyone knew. Grayson Walker never appeared in the break room. Not unless there was a reason, and he never spoke casually to low-ranking staff. Not unless he was watching. At the end of that shift, Donna Pruitt was waiting outside the locker room. Her arms were crossed, her gaze sharp as a blade. Fun, huh? Talking on the phone all afternoon, speaking some language no one understands. Who do you think you are? A diplomat? Jasmine remained silent. Donna moved closer, lowering her head so her face was just inches from Jasmine's. I don't know what you're planning, but don't think some fancy trick is going to help you climb. This is the real world, Jasmine. Here, people like you are only allowed to clean, no talking, no looking up. Jasmine clenched her fists. She didn't respond. Not because she was scared, but because she had become all too familiar with people like Donna, those who used petty power to crush any light that wasn't in their hands. But this time, Jasmine wasn't sure what she was thinking. Was that moment, the look from Grayson Walker, the lunch wish, just a fleeting interaction? Or was it something quietly shifting in the layers of power she couldn't touch, but had accidentally cracked open a small window into? He left, without saying another word. But that silence left a deeper impact than any thunderous sound. The staff break room door closed behind Grayson Walker, leaving Jasmine standing frozen in place. The cold lunchbox on the table, her mind spinning as if she had just dreamed something that transcended the boundaries of reality. Never, in the 2 years she had worked at Belgrave Manhattan, had she spoken directly to the owner. And never, in any training session, had there been any guidelines that prepared her for this. When a billionaire personally asks your name and walks away without explanation. But Jasmine understood one thing. That was not a casual question. At a place like Belgrave, every action of Grayson was analyzed, discussed, and even speculated upon. There were rumors that he had fired a manager just for daring to call a VIP guest from the Arab world buddy. Some said he once called a housekeeper to the rooftop and gave her a scholarship to Le Cordon Bleu Culinary School in Paris, just because he noticed the way she folded napkins, humble yet mindful. No one understood him, and that was why everyone feared him. Donna Pruitt, of course, didn't let it slide. The next morning, during a staff meeting, she threw a pointed look at Jasmine and said in front of the whole room, "We shouldn't misuse our lunch breaks for personal matters, especially ones related to a language no one here needs." The room went silent. A new employee almost laughed, but quickly swallowed it when he saw Jasmine's face. Jasmine only looked down at her hands, her nails lightly pressing into her palm to keep calm. Not because of the comment, but because of the lingering fear that yesterday's moment was just an illusion, a cruel twist of fate to mock her. But then, that afternoon, while cleaning tables in the executive lounge on the 38th floor, Jasmine received a text from the shift manager, Marcus Hill, a calm and reserved middle-aged man who rarely ever sent anything other than shift instructions. "Brooks, HR wants to see you, right now." Jasmine's heart dropped to her knees. No explanation, no clear reason. Just a single sentence, like a summons to an interrogation. She took off her gloves, washed her hands in the restroom, adjusted her hair, and quietly walked toward the back elevator leading to the executive offices, the place where cleaning staff rarely set foot. The Human Resources office was on the 5th floor, the administrative floor, where the lighting wasn't the soft yellow of the guest floors, but cold white like a hospital. Every closed door seemed to carry its own weight. Jasmine walked down the hallway, her palms sweating, her heart pounding so fast it felt like it might explode. She knocked lightly 3 times on the frosted glass door marked Valerie Green, Director of Human Resources. Inside, Mrs. Green, a white woman in her early 50s with platinum hair pulled up and wearing black-rimmed glasses, was sorting through paperwork. When Jasmine entered, she looked up, a faint smile on her lips, unsure whether it was polite or sarcastic. "Come in, Jasmine. Have a seat." Jasmine sat, her back straight, her hands resting on her thighs as if in a job interview. "I received a special request this morning. Something that hasn't happened in nearly 18 years of working here," Valerie said without wasting words. "Mr. Walker personally requested that you be transferred, effective immediately." Jasmine's eyes widened. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Transferred where?" "A newly created position, International Relations Assistant. Your duties will include assisting non-English speaking VIPs, handling multilingual communications, and coordinating cultural affairs." Jasmine froze. "You'll have an office on the executive floor, new uniforms, and a salary, 3 times your current one." Her head buzzed. She didn't know what to say, didn't know whether to be happy, scared, or to doubt that this was all a trap. Is this for real?" Her voice was softer than the hum of the air conditioning. Valerie nodded, her gaze warming for the first time. "It's very real. And one thing you should know, Mr. Walker never acts impulsively. If he says your talent is being wasted, it has been thoroughly considered, very carefully." Jasmine stood up like a sleepwalker, holding the transfer confirmation, walking through the hallway where just yesterday she had been scrubbing the floors. The red carpets embroidered with gold, the crystal chandeliers. Everything suddenly felt unfamiliar. It was as if she were stepping into a play she had never seen the script for. But somehow, she was still the lead role. She didn't know what awaited her behind the highest office door, but one thing was clear: Grayson Walker had seen something in her, when no one else would. Grayson Walker had seen something in her, when no one else would look. But Jasmine still didn't understand what that was, or why it was her. She only knew that when she walked out of Human Resources that morning, the world no longer felt the same. The elevator door opened on the executive floor, where, until now, Jasmine had only been able to look up from below. Walnut-paneled walls, ivory marble floors, and lighting perfectly adjusted to create a feeling of warmth but also authority. There was no noise. Every sound here seemed to be filtered through velvet, even the footsteps. A tall receptionist approached, handing her a cream-colored folder. "Miss Brooks, here is your new employee ID. Your temporary workstation is in room 43B. Jasmine took it, her hand trembling slightly. Beneath the glass of the card, the words, "International Guest Relations Associate," glowed against the silver background. She was no longer wearing the housekeeping uniform. Now, she wore a tailored navy blazer that fit her slim frame perfectly, with an ivory silk blouse and dark trousers, black leather shoes with low heels. Everything had been prepared, almost as if someone had studied her measurement, skin tone, and even her walking habits. As she walked through the executive hallway, where she once stooped to dust the stair railings, where she once lowered her head to avoid VIP guests' eyes, now people looked up at her, not with admiration, but with suspicion, appraisal, and a readiness to judge. Especially Donna Pruitt, who happened to see her near the pantry on the 40th floor. She stood frozen for a few seconds, then quickly regained her sharp tone. "Oh, look who it is! The language queen! I bet you've forgotten the smell of bleach by now, haven't you?" Jasmine didn't respond, but this time her gaze didn't lower. She simply looked straight at Donna, not angrily, not resentfully, but calmly, as if facing an old shadow that no longer held any power over her. Donna scoffed. "Don't think that because you're wearing a fancy suit you've changed your place. Here, people still remember who you are." After lunch, Jasmine was invited to the highest floor, where Grayson Walker's office was located. The glass door opened, and for the first time, she stepped into the space once referred to as the glass room, where decisions worth hundreds of millions of dollars were made with a mere nod. The office was nothing like she imagined. It wasn't a cold, cinematic room with a desk piled high with papers or large computer screens. On the contrary, it was spacious, minimalist, and so quiet that she could hear the beat of her own heart. The windows stretched up to the ceiling, offering a view of Central Park, with the afternoon sunlight casting a golden glow on the wooden floor like a layer of silk. Grayson stood by the window, hands in his pockets, still without a tie. He turned when Jasmine entered. His gray-blue eyes stopped on her, and he gave a slight nod. "You're here. Please, sit." They sat across from each other. No secretary, no assistant, no typing sounds. Just two people. One a man with eyes that knew too much, and one young woman who still didn't understand why she was there. Grayson poured coffee for both of them. His movements were slow, deliberate, like they had been practiced through thousands of negotiations. "I won't beat around the bush, Jasmine," he began, his voice soft as if telling a story. "I created that position for you, not out of kindness, but because I need someone like you." Jasmine's eyes widened. "I heard you speak yesterday. It wasn't just the vocabulary. It was the way you used language instinctively. You didn't just speak, you made people feel it, and that's what I need." Jasmine bit her lip lightly. Her mind was a whirlwind of questions. But why me? Out of the hundreds of people here, why did you choose me, someone who used to just scrub the floors on the 35th floor? Grayson leaned back in his chair. "Because I used to be the one scrubbing floors." His words seemed to stop the air in the room. "I used to work as a janitor in an old hotel in Detroit. I cleaned toilets, changed light bulbs, took leftover food home. I remember that feeling. The feeling of being treated as an object, not a person. And I promised myself, if one day I made it, I would never overlook talent just because someone wore the wrong uniform." Jasmine felt a lump rise in her throat. "I don't need you to be good at talking to CEOs. I need you to understand the psychology of the person in front of you and have the courage to speak up at the right moment." He pushed a stack of papers toward her. "This afternoon, I have a negotiation with a delegation from Spain, a big deal, and I want you to stand next to me not just as a translator, but as someone who ensures the communication doesn't break down." Jasmine looked at the stack of papers, her hands still shaking. One day ago, she had been cleaning leftover food trays in the executive lounge. Today, she was sitting in the most powerful room, being asked to step into a role she had never imagined. She looked up, slowly nodding. "I will do my best, sir." Grayson smiled, a smile that was the first since they met. "I don't need you to try. I just need you to be yourself. The rest, I'll take care of." She stepped into Grayson Walker's office. He was standing with his back to her, gazing out over the Manhattan skyline, and felt as though she was stepping out of her old life. The tailored business suit fit Jasmine perfectly. A navy blazer fastened with a black button, trousers that elongated her height, and soft leather shoes with a low heel that made no sound. In the mirror, she looked no different than a senior executive at Belgrave, but inside, her heart still beat with the anxiety of the girl who once slept in a moldy room in the Bronx. The executive floor corridor was more crowded than usual. The glances she had once avoided were now fixed on her. Some were surprised, some uncomfortable, and some full of suspicion. she heard someone whispering behind her. Is that her? The one who was cleaning the 35th floor just yesterday. What's Grayson Walker doing? Probably just another diversity move from the company. She'll be gone in a few weeks. Jasmine kept her chin high, her hand clutching the slim tablet with the afternoon's schedule. Each step felt like compressing her entire life, like walking on the prejudices that had been scattered along the red carpet. But she didn't stop. She didn't cower. She didn't lower her head anymore. The door to Grayson's office was open. He still stood with his back to her, eyes looking out at Central Park, where the bare trees of March were still stark after a cold winter. Hearing the light footsteps, he turned, his eyes lighting up with a quiet satisfaction. "You look exactly as I imagined," he said. "How does it feel?" Jasmine hesitated. "It feels like I've just stepped into a dream, but I'm not sure I'm ready to wake up." Grayson chuckled softly, a rare smile, not for the press or business partners, but one that was genuine. "Maybe, but you're not dreaming, and you don't need to be ready. Just show up." He poured her a glass of water, not coffee, not wine, and then handed her a list. "The investment delegation from Madrid, 6 people. They've worked with Ritz-Carlton, but this time they want something more personal. I don't need you to do anything except keep the atmosphere warm." Jasmine nodded, but her throat was dry. How could someone who had once been invisible become the person to set the tone for a $280 million deal? At exactly 2 p.m., the glass-walled meeting room on the 50th floor opened. The Spanish men entered, sharp suits, silk ties, eyes as sharp as knives. Leading the group was Señor Carlos Martín, a face that had appeared in European business magazines. Grayson shook each of their hands, polite but not over the top. Jasmine walked behind, quietly greeting them in perfect Castilian Spanish. "Bienvenidos a Belgrave, Manhattan. Es un honor tenerlos aquí." "Welcome to Belgrave, Manhattan. We are honored to have you here." A slight frown, then a soft smile. Señor Carlos nodded, as if mentally checking off an invisible criterion. The atmosphere in the room was initially tense, like a taut string. Everyone ready to counter, protect their interests, and predict the motives of the other side. Jasmine understood that her job wasn't just to translate. It was to connect. To ensure that language didn't turn into a weapon. The most challenging moment came when Señor Carlos half-jokingly said, "We once had a partner in New York. They spoke in money. What about you?" Grayson hadn't responded yet. Jasmine smiled, leaning slightly. "Y nosotros hablamos con hechos. Pero si es necesario, también sabemos escuchar el corazón. And we speak with actions, but if necessary, we also know how to listen with the heart." The room fell silent for a moment. Then Señor Carlos burst out laughing. A genuine laugh, one that wasn't scripted. "Me gusta esta chica." "I like this girl." The negotiation lasted nearly 2 hours. Each time the conversation veered off, Jasmine adjusted. Each time there was a cultural misunderstanding, she explained. Every nod from the investors was a step toward success. And when it ended, the last person to leave the room was Señor Carlos, who stopped by Grayson and said, "With an employee like this, I don't need to check anything else. I'm signing because of her." When the door closed behind him, Jasmine exhaled, both hands pressed against the glass table to steady herself. Grayson stepped toward her, his voice lower than the hum of the air conditioner. "You just saved a $280 million deal." Jasmine turned, her eyes wide. I didn't. I just did my job." "No, Jasmine." Grayson looked at her seriously. "You just stepped into the world of people who make change happen." And someone like you is no longer someone who stands backstage. Grayson replied, I didn't hire you for the protocol. I hired you for your instinct and sincerity. And now, after the unexpectedly successful negotiation, Jasmine began to understand what he truly meant. Late afternoon, the last rays of sunlight swept across the glass of Grayson's office, casting a pale yellow streak on Jasmine's blazer like a thread connecting her to something bigger than herself. She had just left the meeting room where millions of dollars were signed with a handshake and trust, and she, herself, was the one holding that thread intact. Grayson stood by the walnut wood desk near the window, not holding a phone, not flipping through documents. He just stood there, silent, as though considering something beyond profits and business plans. Jasmine, he spoke after a few minutes, his voice deep and sincere. I have a place. I often go there when I need to clear my mind, not the office, not the hotel. No employees know about it. She looked at him, her legs still trembling from the pressure of the meeting. You mean now? Grayson nodded. If you have nothing on tonight. Jasmine hesitated. Every instinct she had, honed to survive in a harsh, tiered world, screamed at her. Don't go. Don't trust the most powerful man in the building. Don't step into his personal space when you've just escaped the basement. But that same instinct, the one that once told her she couldn't do more than clean, was wrong. And that's why she nodded. About 20 minutes later, they were in the private elevator heading up to the Belgrave rooftop, the place where hardly anyone was allowed except for Grayson Walker. The door opened to an unexpectedly quiet space. A rooftop garden filled with small olive trees, stone tables, wooden chairs, and a cobblestone path stretching to the edge of a glass railing. In the distance, the Manhattan skyline glowed in the fading sunset. It's not what I imagined, Jasmine whispered. Because no one imagines I need a place like this, Grayson replied. But I do, when I want to remember who I am. They sat on a wooden bench near the railing, the breeze gently pulling Jasmine's hair behind her ear. He poured wine into 2 paper cups. No crystal glasses, no silver trays. No longer CEO and employee. No longer boss and the girl who once scrubbed conference room floors. Just 2 people, perhaps for the first time in their lives, being themselves. You know, Grayson began, his gaze still on the horizon. I was once turned down for a job at a hotel because of poor communication. They didn't know I had a slight speech impediment from breaking my jaw when I was younger. After that, I plastered quotes on my wall, reading them aloud every day just to practice my pronunciation. Jasmine turned to him, her eyes wide. He had never shared that with the public before. And then I realized, people will always reject what they don't understand. The silence, the difference. A girl cleaning rooms, speaking Spanish at noon. She lowered her head. I was afraid you'd misunderstand. That you'd think I was unprofessional. Grayson shook his head. I didn't hear an employee talking. I heard a person living in a language, and I knew I couldn't let that go to waste. The wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of lavender from the garden. Jasmine suddenly remembered her mother. She, too, liked sitting and watching the sunset, in the old rocking chair on the balcony of their rundown apartment. She once said, people who know how to look far often live alone. But they're the ones who'll pave the way. Jasmine turned to him, speaking softly. Do you ever regret choosing the wrong person? Grayson thought for a moment, then replied, yes, many times. But I've never regretted choosing someone I trusted, even when they didn't believe in themselves. A pause lingered. Manhattan below them seemed like a moving map, bustling, fierce, not waiting for anyone. But in that moment, Jasmine felt an unusual peace. Not because she was close to power, but because, for the first time, she was being seen. Truly seen. Grayson spoke softly, as if weighing his words carefully. "Tomorrow, I want you to sit in on a meeting with the board of directors. Not translating, not taking notes, just observing. I need you next to me." She looked at him. This time, no fear. Just the silence of someone stepping out of their own shadow. "I'll be there," Jasmine replied, her voice steady. "Not because I'm ready, but because I don't want to go back to where I was." "I'll be there," Jasmine replied, her voice steady. "Not because I'm ready, but because I don't want to go back to where I was." And the next day she truly stepped into the realm of power, where words not only convey meaning, but determine the fate of an empire. The strategy meeting room on the 49th floor was unlike any space Jasmine had ever seen. The long mahogany table, Italian leather chairs, and 4 walls made entirely of one-way glass, offering a view of the entire Manhattan skyline. Every detail was designed to make anyone who entered feel smaller. Exactly at 9 a.m., the door opened. Jasmine entered with Grayson. All eyes immediately turned to her, a newcomer, a black woman, sitting right next to the CEO. No one said anything, but the tension in their shoulders, the quick glances, and the silent exchanges spoke volumes. Everyone was waiting for her to make a mistake. The meeting began. Grayson gave an overview of the negotiation results with the Spanish investors, and Jasmine nodded slightly when her name was mentioned as someone who helped navigate cultural bottlenecks with refined communication. Less than 10 minutes later, a silver-haired man with a red tie spoke up. "With all due respect, Grayson, I'm not sure if we're discussing a coordinator or an inspirational representative." He was Lawrence Fielding, the Global Chief Operating Officer, and one of the strongest opponents of personnel interventions without approval from senior HR. Grayson remained calm. "I'm talking about the person who helped us close a nearly $300 million deal that had been stalled for 2 consecutive quarters." Lawrence smirked and turned to Jasmine. "Miss Brooks, could you tell me, aside from Spanish, do you have any financial skills to contribute to this strategic meeting?" The air tensed, a clear trap. Jasmine took a deep breath, then replied, her gaze unwavering. "No, Mr. Fielding, I don't have an MBA, but I have enough experience to understand that if language is used incorrectly, even the perfect financial plan can collapse due to misunderstanding. And if you'd like an example, I can reference 3 sections of yesterday's negotiation transcript where the parties almost misunderstood the confidentiality agreement." No one spoke. A few directors exchanged looks. Grayson tilted his head slightly, his lips curling into a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. The meeting continued. But now Jasmine was no longer an outsider. She became the rhythm keeper. She didn't interrupt, but every time there was a complex term she quietly wrote it down for Grayson. Whenever there was a tricky opinion, she pinpointed the key point and translated it into concise, logical language. The silence wasn't because she overpowered them, but because she was clearly indispensable. After nearly 2 hours of tense discussions, the meeting ended with an unexpectedly high consensus rate. Jasmine gathered her notes, preparing to leave the room, when she heard Lawrence stand up and slowly say, "Miss Brooks." She stopped, turning back. He looked at her. This time not coldly, but like someone who had just lost a chess game. "You're not what I expected, but maybe you're what we need." That afternoon, in the executive elevator, Jasmine ran into Donna Pruitt. She looked Jasmine up and down, this time no sarcasm, no mockery, just a silent look, as if realizing that the girl who once got scolded for a watermark on a bathroom mirror was now stepping into a world no one could have imagined. Donna nodded, not as a greeting, but as a reluctant acknowledgement. Jasmine didn't need her to say anything, because sometimes silence is the most arrogant form of surrender. That night, in her small Bronx apartment, Jasmine sat on the wooden chair by the window, the streetlights casting shadows on the peeling plaster of the walls. In front of her was the voicemail with a congratulatory message from Dr. Mateo Sanchez. Next to it was the stack of documents Grayson had given her to prepare for the international coordination meeting with the Brazilian delegation next week. She picked up the small mirror and looked at herself. The girl, who once bowed her head to scrub the floors beneath people who didn't even remember her name, was now holding her head high in meeting rooms where words were worth millions of dollars. Jasmine hesitated, then nodded. She didn't ask where he was taking her. She didn't ask why it was her. Because for the first time in many years, someone wasn't looking at her as a role to play, but as a person. The silver-gray Range Rover glided through the familiar avenues of Manhattan, but it didn't turn into any of the luxury restaurants. There were no bodyguards, no assistants, no parties waiting. Just a quiet journey that stretched all the way to the peaceful residential area north of the city, where the city lights became sparse and the shadows of trees grew thicker than the neon signs. The car stopped in front of a 2-story red brick house with a black-tiled roof and white-painted wooden doors. No gate, no nameplate. Jasmine looked out the window, surprised. "My home," Grayson said, as if anticipating the question she hadn't yet voiced. "Not a penthouse, not a suburban mansion, just the one place I don't have to keep up appearances." Inside, the house had a completely different feel from the 50th floor office. The scent of pine wood and mint lingered in the air. On the walls there were black and white photographs. An elderly man in work overalls, his father. A small white child with messy brown hair, smiling broadly next to a mop bucket. An old photo of 2 hands, one old, one young, clasped together. No awards, no accolades, just memories. Grayson hung his coat on a hook, rolled up his shirt sleeves. He didn't call for a maid, he didn't give orders. He cooked dinner himself. Homemade pasta, simmered tomato sauce with fresh herbs from the garden in the back. Jasmine sat at the kitchen counter stirring her glass of lemonade, feeling both surprised and strangely safe. "How long did you live here?" she asked. "Almost 10 years, Grayson replied, his eyes not leaving the pot of boiling water. "I bought it right after the company started turning a large profit. Not because I needed a place to live, but because I was tired of not remembering where home was anymore." He looked up at her. "What about you, Jasmine? Is your apartment home?" She was quiet for a moment. "It's where my mother passed. It's where I survived. But I'm not sure it's where I belong." Grayson nodded slightly. He understood. Dinner was served on a simple oak table with just 2 porcelain plates, 2 glasses of wine, and a small candlelight. Nothing extravagant, but it felt real. They talked, not about business strategies, not about market plans, but about family, about fear, about things they never discussed in public. Grayson talked about his father, a man who worked the night shift at a hotel, always bringing home small soap samples for his son so he could use the things of the rich. Jasmine talked about her mother, about those nights when they both slept on the same mattress in the hospital, and the last words her mother said before she passed. "You're the only person in this world I know for sure won't break." After dinner, they went out to the front porch where the sky had begun to drizzle. The sound of the rain on the roof, the smell of damp earth rising, permeated the unsaid words between them. Grayson set his glass of wine down on the armrest, silent for a long while. Then he turned to her, his gaze no longer that of a boss, but of a man who had shed all pretense. "Jasmine," he said, softly, as if afraid to break the space between them. "I'm not sure when it started, but now, I can't imagine this world without you in it." She turned to look at him, her eyes wide, not in surprise, but in fear that she might be hearing things wrong. She hesitated. "I've lost too much to believe in anything like affection coming from someone like you. Someone like me." Grayson tilted his head. "Power. Status. Being chosen. And what about me? I have to fight for every opportunity, every breath. If this gets out, people will say I slept with the boss to get promoted. They won't believe I'm good, they'll never believe it." Grayson remained silent, but his eyes never left hers. Not to argue, not to make excuses. "You have the right to refuse," he said. "And if you leave this place tomorrow, your job will stay the same. Your salary will stay the same. You'll still be Jasmine Brooks, the one I trust most. But if you stay—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The rain started to fall more heavily. Jasmine looked out at the misty water in front of the porch, gripping the cold glass in her hand. A distant thunderclap echoed, nothing too close but enough to make her heart tighten. She turned back to look at him, slowly. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "I haven't fallen, Mom," Jasmine said, her gaze growing distant as she looked out at the rooftop garden bathed in soft yellow light, where lavender bushes swayed in the night wind, as if nodding in agreement. The garden was on an old building by the Hudson River, not owned by any corporation, with no sign, no security. It was the place Grayson called the Land of No Memory, because here he was not the CEO, not the billionaire, not the target of any expectations or strategies, just a man standing among the trees and the sky. Jasmine sat on a stone bench beneath the vine-covered archway, holding a warm cup of herbal tea, still moved by the story of Grayson's father, who had passed away from exhaustion at 52, leaving his son a rusted pocket watch and a single sentence engraved on its back. "Build something your father never had." "Did you build it?" Jasmine asked. Grayson paused, nodding slowly. "I've built more than my father ever dreamed, but it took me too long to realize it wasn't that he needed me to build hotels. It was that he needed a world where people like him weren't seen as beneath anyone." They were silent for a while, only the sound of the wind and the soft swaying of the lanterns in the breeze. Jasmine opened her leather wallet and took out a faded photograph. A gentle smiling black woman standing in front of a window with brown striped curtains. Her mother, Darlene Brooks. "This photo was taped by the Mirror all through the time I was in school," Jasmine said. Every morning she would touch it and say, "Tomorrow, you'll go farther than I ever dared dream." She smiled, her voice trembling like the wind. I never believed it, but I still went, because if I stopped, her dream would be left behind. Grayson looked at her, unwavering. In his eyes, it wasn't the usual admiration a boss gives a capable employee. It was a deep acceptance, as though he was seeing himself through her, an entity once crushed beneath the cement of prejudice and class, but somehow still rising to the surface to breathe and live. "You've done it," he said. "Even though she's gone, she lives in every step you take. And now, you're living in decisions that will change the lives of others." Jasmine didn't know how to respond. She simply looked directly at him, feeling something shift in Grayson's gaze, not violently, not unexpectedly, but quietly, as if he'd realized he was in a feeling he hadn't known before. And then he spoke. "I'm not sure when it started. Maybe it was when you spoke Spanish without fear of anyone hearing. Or when you didn't react when they looked at you like a joke. Or maybe when you look Donna in the eye without anger, only with the calm of someone who knows their worth. Jasmine smiled faintly. I used to think I was strong because I didn't need anyone. But maybe stronger is when you dare to let someone stay by your side. Grayson reached out his hand. Not in haste, not in pressure, just an open hand, as an offer without an answer. Jasmine looked at it. The small distance between them, distance that an entire social hierarchy had tried to keep from ever touching. And then she placed her hand in his. Gently, decisively. No need for a kiss. No need for declarations of love. Because everything unspoken had already been carved into the gaze they shared in the darkness. The next morning, back at the hotel, Jasmine walked into the grand lobby. Familiar glances turned toward her, but this time they no longer made her hesitate. However, at the corner of the executive floor hallway, Lawrence Fielding was talking to Donna Pruitt. When Jasmine walked past, he stopped abruptly. Both of them turned to look at her, not so much with surprise, but with calculation. Donna smirked. "Faster than I thought." Lawrence replied lightly, "I don't oppose progress, but if it threatens the leadership structure, I have to act." Jasmine didn't turn back, but her instincts, honed by years of survival, told her a new battle was coming. And this time, they wouldn't use just their eyes. They would use the system. As long as I'm alive, no one is allowed to doubt you. Grayson's words fell like a commitment. Quiet, not showy, but resonating in Jasmine's chest like the sound of thunder echoing in the quiet of the night. Outside, the rain began to fall. The first drops lightly tapped the roof tiles, gradually turning into a heavier downpour, not violent, but impossible to ignore. The damp, chilly air mixed with the smell of earth and mint from the garden behind, enveloping everything in a strange, bittersweet dream. Jasmine sat there, her hand gently resting in Grayson's. Hands that had once held the power of an empire, now only gripping one thing: trust. She looked up at him, her gaze hesitant. "Are you sure?" "Once the rumors start, they won't stop," Grayson answered, his voice steady like the rain. "I've lived my life being judged, but this is the first time I've chosen to stand with what makes my heart quiet, not because it's weak, but because it knows it's meeting something worthy." The next morning, Jasmine returned to the hotel through the back entrance. No private car, no escort. She was still Jasmine, the one who knew how to move quietly, leaving no trace. But this time, they noticed. Executive floor. The elevator doors opened, and there stood Lawrence Fielding, holding a file, his face unreadable. "Miss Brooks," he said, cutting off her steps. "We need you in the senior coordination room at 10 a.m. There are a few things to verify regarding your recent HR file." Jasmine nodded, but she knew. This wasn't a routine check. This was a warning wrapped in procedure. At 10 a.m., the coordination room was filled with cold, white light. A female HR assistant, Camille Rhodes, Lawrence's senior assistant, sat opposite Jasmine, placing a recorder and a file marked in red. "We've been instructed to review cases of employees hired outside the 3-tier approval process," Camille began, not taking her eyes off Jasmine. Specifically, positions that were created without internal or external posting. Jasmine sat up straight. "If you're referring to me, I'm happy to answer any questions." Camille nodded, but her expression was far from friendly. "We've also received reports that you have a personal relationship with CEO Grayson Walker. If this is true, and it affects the decision-making process regarding staff, then—" "Then what?" Jasmine asked, her tone cold, not challenging but firm enough not to be pushed back. Then any preferential treatment would need to be reported to the Internal Ethics Board. That was the first strike. No proof required. Just implication. And in places like this, implication is the weapon. That afternoon, in the executive break room, Jasmine sat alone. She didn't call Grayson. She knew that if he found out, he'd cancel all his meetings and come immediately. But that wasn't what she needed. She needed to stand. Alone. That evening, the rain fell again. But this time, it wasn't on the peaceful rooftop. It was on the porch of her old apartment in the Bronx. She sat there, her wet coat clinging to her, eyes on the fading photo of her mother, hand gripping a notice from HR, asking to verify her personal relationship with her superior. A soft warning before it became formal. The doorbell rang. Jasmine opened it. It was Grayson. He stood there, no umbrella, no coat, just a man, drenched, with an expression of quiet understanding. "You haven't said anything," he exhaled. "But I know." "And you think I can't handle it?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. "No, but I don't want you to have to handle it alone." They stood there in the rain. No holding hands, no embraces. Just looking at each other, as if two warriors who had just realized the feelings between them weren't something to hide, but something to protect. And even as the storms ahead threatened to be fierce, Jasmine knew one thing for sure. She had lived through a life where no one believed she would rise. And now, not only was she standing, but she was moving forward with the one person who had chosen to believe in her, even before she believed in herself. And even when the storms ahead may be fierce, Jasmine knew one thing for sure. She wasn't just standing, she was moving forward. And less than a week later, that step took her to a position she had never dared to dream of: International Strategy Director. The news spread like wildfire. After the expansion agreement to bring Belgrave to Spain was fully signed, complete with sponsorship terms for 2 facilities in Madrid and Valencia, Grayson didn't hold a press conference. No announcements. He simply did one thing. He brought Jasmine up to the stage at the company's annual conference and introduced her with 8 simple words: "The woman who keeps us from stagnating." The appointment was announced internally on Monday morning. A brief email from the chairman's office, unpretentious but full of weight. A link to Jasmine's new official profile, now with the title Director of Global Strategic Relations, Jasmine D. Brooks. From housekeeping to global strategy, in less than 6 months. And that was what made the resistance show its true face. On the executive floor, Lawrence Fielding stood before a small meeting table with a close-knit advisory group. His usually calm face was now tense. His hands were tapping relentlessly on the glass table, eyes scanning everyone in the room. "Who is she?" he asked, his voice slicing through the air. "A housekeeper. No vetting, no progress reports, no internal procedures." A female assistant spoke hesitantly. "Sir, Miss Brooks just saved the European contract." "And that gives her the right to sit on par with me?" Lawrence snapped. "I don't oppose diversity, I oppose chaos." Another whispered, "If we don't react quickly, she will control all international relations in the next 2 quarters." Lawrence clenched his fist. "Then we need to act fast, find any loophole, the past, relationships, qualifications, family background. If there's anything that can discredit her, I want to know before this week ends." On the surface, Jasmine continued to smile as she entered the meeting room. But deep down, she could clearly feel that every gaze in the hallway was no longer just observing, but watching. She began to notice the signs. A meeting rescheduled for when she was out of the hotel. A strategic document sent late, causing her to be delayed. An internal speech scheduled, but her name was missing from the list of speakers. even though it was the project she was in charge of. One afternoon, when Jasmine returned to her office after a meeting with the German partners, she found her desk had been rummaged through. Nothing was missing, but the photo of her mother, which she had always placed fixed, was now turned askew. She knew this wasn't theft, it was a warning. That night, in Grayson's living room, she sat silently by the window. He sat not far away, reading through investment reports, but occasionally his gaze drifted towards her. "I won't give up," Jasmine said without turning around. "No matter what tricks they use." Grayson folded the papers, walked over, and sat beside her. "I know, but that doesn't mean you have to fight alone." Jasmine turned to face him, the first hint of red showing beneath her glasses. "They won't stop. They see me as a threat, not because I'm incapable, but because I'm living proof that talent is no longer hidden by class." 3 days later, the first article appeared. Promotion or favoritism? The question surrounding Jasmine Brooks' new role at Walker Holdings. No signature, no sources cited, but the cover photo was of her and Grayson sitting together at last month's conference. The article had only one purpose: to sow doubt. As soon as the article began circulating, Grayson called an emergency meeting with the communications team. "I'll step forward," Jasmine said, as everyone debated whether to stay silent or respond selectively. "Are you sure?" Grayson asked. "Sure," she said, her eyes bright. "Because if I let someone else define my story, they'll write it in a language that makes me unrecognizable." The next day, Jasmine appeared at an internal speech in the main hall of the Belgrave Hotel, where she had once scrubbed the floors beneath the brown leather chairs. She stepped onto the stage, dressed in a dark purple suit, her curly hair tied low, her gaze unflinching. And she spoke. About the years no one called her by name, about the whispers she used to hear behind her back, about learning to stand firm, not because someone lifted her up, but because each fall left her with an irrefutable map. As she left the stage, the entire hall stood and applauded, not because she was the CEO's girlfriend, not because of her title, but because she had made her existence something that could no longer be ignored. People might doubt her, but Jasmine just looked up at the sky, smiling, and thought, "I've done it, Mom." And in that moment, she was no longer just a name being honored, she became a symbol. The opening of Belgrave Madrid, the first five-star hotel of Walker Holdings in Spain, was not just an economic event. It was the declaration of the beginning of a global ambition to expand the strategic empathy service model designed by Jasmine, and of course, it drew all eyes. European media, investors, strategic partners, labor and equality organizations, everyone was there. Jasmine stepped onto the stage with a calm demeanor, wearing a perfectly tailored cream-white suit. Her high-end leather shoes reflected the light as if reminding the world. She had once been a shadow on marble floors, and now she had stepped out of it. Grayson stood beside her, a subtle smile on his lips but his eyes full of pride. He introduced her to the entire audience. "The person standing beside me today isn't here because I chose her. She's here because she chose the path no one believed she could take, and she did what no one dared think was possible." Jasmine tilted her head and walked up to the microphone. She didn't give a speech, she told a story. About her mother. About the Spanish whispers in winter mornings, about the cold lunchbox in the basement break room, and about how one person, daring to learn, to step forward, and to believe, could break every path that had been laid out for her. The ceremony ended with a thunderous applause. The press called her the one who opens doors not with a business card, but with language and courage. Social media posts spread videos of her speech with the headline, "From housekeeper to global leader, The Unstoppable Story of Jasmine Brooks. But in the hotel's executive office, Lawrence Fielding was still watching everything through the screen. He wasn't in Madrid, he didn't attend. But his person, Camille Rhodes, was there, preparing for the final strike. 1 hour before the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Camille sent an unpublished internal investigation summary to more than 15 European media outlets, suggesting that Jasmine Brooks was appointed through personal relations with Grayson Walker, without going through the necessary 3-tier competency review process. The document was stamped with a fake seal, but crafted so convincingly that smaller news outlets immediately jumped on it. After the ceremony, as Jasmine was leaving the stage, she was stopped by a female reporter from Belgium. "Miss Brooks, was your appointment only after private dinner with CEO Walker? Some internal sources say your position is a reward for that relationship." The atmosphere froze. Grayson stepped forward to respond, but Jasmine raised her hand gently to signal for him to stop. She turned back to face the entire press room. "This question isn't new. I've heard it, in various forms, hundreds of times. The issue isn't whether or not I have a relationship with Mr. Walker. The issue is why, even though I'm sitting here with a list of tangible achievements, qualifications, and measurable success, do you still believe that affection is the only way a black woman can move up?" The camera shutters stopped. "And if you truly care about competence, I'm happy to publicly share my entire career, trajectory, projects, and partners I've been responsible for. Nothing to hide." She lowered her head and smiled, not out of modesty, but from the grace of strength. The press conference ended, and most international media voiced their support for Jasmine. Several independent organizations began investigating the source of the internal investigation file and found signs of forgery. Camille Rhodes was suspended and recalled to the USAs for Lawrence. He didn't show his face, but his closest assistants knew. He was betting his final pieces. That evening, in her suite at the Belgrave Madrid, Jasmine opened the balcony door, looking down at the crowd in the old town celebrating. In her hand was a phone with a message from the Asia Regional Director, asking her to help implement the strategy in Singapore and Tokyo. Grayson stepped up behind her, gently placing his hand on her shoulder. "The world is opening up," he said. "I know," she replied, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "And this time, I won't just step in. I'll open the door for those who follow me." In the dim lights of the city, they were no longer the billionaire and the housekeeper. They were two souls who had chosen to trust each other in a world that had taught them to doubt everything, especially themselves. That night, the suite at Belgrave Madrid was not just a resting place after a series of tense days. It was a stopping point. Not to end, but to reflect. Grayson sat beside Jasmine on the sofa near the window. Outside, the city lights stretched into shimmering streaks across the Manzanares River. The breeze was light, the air crisp, but in that space there was only the warmth of the two of them, slowly shedding their final layers of armor. "What are you thinking?" Grayson asked, his hand still tightly entwined with hers. Jasmine looked up at him, her eyes holding an entire journey. "About everything I've been through. About the night I rested my head on a lunchbox in the library and no one asked if I was okay. About the one call in the basement lounge that turned my whole life around. And about how, sometimes, love finds you when you least expect it." He didn't say anything. He just held her tighter. In that embrace, there was no power, no title, just mutual recognition, like survivors in a world full of deceit, but still holding on to something real. 3 weeks after returning to New York, Jasmine was invited to speak at the Global Business Leadership Summit. But instead of talking about expansion strategies or growth metrics, she chose one topic: rebuilding from within. She didn't lecture, didn't use tricks. She just told her story. About her mother, about Donna, about Camille, about Lawrence, not as an enemy but as parts of a system that had been built to eliminate people like her. But if systems are created by people, then people can change them, she concluded with that line, and the entire hall went silent. Not because they disagreed, but because they were reflecting. Not long after, Grayson officially stepped down from his direct executive role. Walker Holdings was handed over to a new leadership board, where Jasmine held the position not of CEO, but of Global Human Resources Reform Director, leading a new initiative called Walker Initiative for Equity and Talent, a program aimed at bringing undervalued, overlooked, and misjudged employees back to the positions they truly deserved. Donna Pruitt, after Jasmine personally sent her a recommendation letter, joined the retraining program at the new headquarters in Arizona. Camille Rhodes had her contract terminated, but not in public shame. Jasmine said one thing during the internal hearing: "I don't want them to be retaliated against. I just want them to understand what they tried to bury has now grown into a tree." Years later, at a small Belgrave hotel in Morocco, a young mixed-race African receptionist received a nomination for the Leadership Development Program Jasmine herself had initiated. In the internal interview, when asked, "Who inspires you?" the girl replied, "Jasmine Brooks, because she didn't try to break the glass ceiling with a hammer. She taught me to climb it with a ladder. But then, she came back and handed the ladder to the next person." One autumn afternoon in the Bronx, Jasmine returned to her old apartment, the one where her mother had once lived. The room now had new tenants, but the landlord kept the handwritten letter she had left when she moved out. The letter had one last line: "If someone reads this and thinks they'll never be heard, know that I once thought the same." That day, standing in front of the public garden she had helped fund, named Darlene's Walk, where children played and single mothers rested under the trees, Jasmine looked up at the golden afternoon sky. Grayson stood beside her, his hair grayer now, holding her hand. "So, is this the peak you once dreamed of?" he asked. Jasmine shook her head, smiling. This is where the journey begins for others." Because this ending was not about happiness. It was a promise. No one would be left behind just because they started where no one cared to stop and look. From a black girl who was invisible in the halls of a hotel, Jasmine Brooks had stepped onto the global stage, not through privilege, but through intelligence, courage, and unwavering determination. Her story wasn't just about love or success. It was a living proof that every system can be changed if someone dares to cross the boundaries set for them and pave the way for those who come after. And what about you? If an opportunity to change your life came when you least expected it, would you have the courage to seize it, even knowing you'll face a world full of doubt? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next inspiring journeys. We will still be here, telling the stories of those once deemed insignificant, but who changed the world.